We have been watching a flurry of executive orders coming in the hours and days after President Trump took office earlier this week. We know many of his policies are going to have big impacts right here in Texas. So joining us is the Director of Research for Texas Politics Project, Joshua Blank. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We always appreciate your insight. So we know many of these executive orders and efforts that we're watching have to do with immigration. We know he has made claims about wanting to perform mass deportations. We want to focus in on those deportations. We wanted to note a national poll from the Associated Press that had some pretty interesting numbers here. It said most Americans agree with increasing security at the border, 82% saying they agree with deporting folks who have been convicted of violent crimes. But that's where things started to break down in this national poll. People who have not been convicted of a crime, the number of support for that dropped to 37%. So there's some national numbers, but we brought you here to tell us, what are folks here in Texas feeling about this? Do we have any numbers that show, what folks would like to see from a Trump administration?
Yeah, I think the first thing to understand is that immigration is a really personal issue to Texans. So when we ask voters what's the most important issue facing the state of Texas, perpetually over the last decade, immigration and border security regularly tops the list. Now, this is driven mostly by Republican voters in the state, but it's something that really explains the consistent focus on the policy. When we ask voters in Texas whether or not they support the idea of immediate deportation of all undocumented immigrants who are here illegally, regardless of conviction status, because the claim would be that they've already broken the law by entering the country illegally, what we find is about 58% of Texans support the idea of immediate deportation. When you look at just Texas Republicans, that jumps to 85%.
Another thing this week that has gotten a lot of focus, of course, birthright citizenship. President Trump is looking to change really what's something that's baked into the Constitution, a right of children born in the United States to parents and how that impacts their citizenship. You all had done some polling on this topic prior to these purported changes this week. What are Texans feeling about this specific element of the immigration conversation?
It's a little bit of a similar story. Now here it's a little bit more challenging because it really does actually kind of run into this idea of what it means to be American and sort of a fealty to the Constitution as written. But even when we asked about this a number of years ago, we still saw about a majority of Texans and a significant majority of Republicans saying, yes, we should amend the Constitution to remove birthright citizenship in the 14th Amendment.
Even knowing that we have so many folks here with close ties to Mexico, to Central America, did you all get any sense on the flip, what were folks who were against any changes to that saying?
Well, some of it has to do with partisanship. Interestingly enough, less of it has to do with race and ethnicity than people often assume. But I think one of the things that you'll find very often in polling and when you actually probe a little deeper and ask respondents in those surveys, do you have any interactions with undocumented immigrants? Is your community one in which a lot of undocumented immigrants live? And what you tend to find is that for most people the answer is no, and especially for voters who tend to be of a slightly higher socioeconomic status than people overall. And so for the most part, this isn't based on necessarily a really well-balanced sort of assessment of the situation. It really is in a lot of ways about an emotional reaction. I mean, to the results you were raising earlier, when people see a problem, they want to see a solution. They're not necessarily aware what the most effective solution is going to be, but they want to see action. And I think what Trump and President Trump now is trying to promise is action.
I want to turn now to energy production. We know Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. He's looking to reduce regulation requirements for oil and natural gas. Very pertinent to us here in Texas. What does the polling show about how Texans feel about some of these changes?
Texas generally tends to be a pretty pro-energy state. Now there is a little bit of a lag here in the sense that the state has not really addressed or taken on the issue of climate change as much as Texas voters, and especially younger voters, Republicans and Democrats in the state would like to see. At the same time, because of these weather events, because honestly still of the grid collapse, there still is a lot of energy and interest among Texans to increase energy production, to increase reliability, and to make sure that something like the winter storm that knocked the power out here doesn't ever happen again.
Definitely something on everybody's minds earlier this week. I think anytime the temperatures drop, we all start to really key in to those issues. So I wish we had more time. I know we'll be checking in with you as the Trump administration continues to take some of its initial actions. Josh Blank, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after the break.